"Have her sent up the back stairs," said the Duke of Glennister, "and out again before I have to look at her." He did not glance up from the ledger. "I want no chatter in this house. She is to mend the coat and go." The steward bowed and withdrew, and the seamstress who was to be sent up the back stairs stood in the cold servants' passage below, holding her work-basket against her chest, and heard every word. She did not flinch. Mr. Adair, the steward, coming down to fetch her, saw a slight woman of perhaps 25 in a neat brown gown much mended at the cuffs, with tired grey eyes and a mouth that had learned not to tremble, and he felt, unexpectedly, ashamed of his master. "You'll not mind the Duke's manner," he said low as he led her up. "He means nothing by it. He means nothing by anything these 3 years past." "I have come to mend a coat, sir," said the seamstress, "not to be spoken to." Her name, she had told him at the door, was Miss Rowan. Miss Clara Rowan, of the town below, who took in fine sewing since her father, the curate, died, and who had been sent for because the Duke of Glennister had torn the seam of the only coat he still consented to wear, and because his valet had been dismissed in a fit of temper the week before, and because there was, in the whole great pile of Glennister Court, no one left who could set a stitch. That, in truth, was the shape of the house. It was a house that had stopped. Julian, Duke of Glennister, had once been counted the most agreeable man in 3 counties. The kind of man who filled a room, who laughed easily, who danced till dawn and paid the fiddlers double, and never let a tenant go cold in winter. That man had died 3 years ago on a wet March night on the London road, when a wheel struck a stone and a carriage went over, and the young Duchess who had been laughing beside him one moment was gone the next, and their whole bright life went into the ground with her at the age of 26. Julian had walked away from the wreck without a scratch on his body. There was not a soul in the county who did not know that the scratches were all on the inside, and that they had never healed. He had shut the great rooms. He had turned off the musicians and the dancing master and the French cook, and in the end most of the household, keeping only enough to feed a man who scarcely ate. He wore black. He wore, specifically, one black coat, the one he had been wearing the night of the accident, mended and remended, because it was the last thing that had touched him while she was still alive, and he could not put it off, and he would sooner have gone in rags than let it go to a tailor to be replaced. And now he had torn the seam of it climbing over a stile in the dark, walking the grounds at an hour when honest men slept, as he did most nights, because the bed was worse. So a seamstress had been sent for, to mend the coat, and to go. Adair showed her into a small side room off the library, where a fire had been grudgingly lit and the coat lay across a chair like something dead. "The Duke will not disturb you," he said. "Ring when you are finished." And he left her. Clara Rowan sat down by the fire and took up the coat, and stopped. She had mended a great many gentlemen's coats. She had never mended one like this. The cloth was good, had been very good, but it was mended everywhere, and mended badly, in the clumsy over and over of a man who did not know how to sew but would let no one else near it. There were tiny stitches too, old ones, fine ones, a woman's work at the collar and one cuff gone brown with age, and Clara understood, holding it, more than the steward had told her. She turned it in the firelight. The torn seam at the shoulder was easily set, but the whole coat was a wound that someone had been dressing, over and over, with hands that did not know how, for 3 years, because he could not bear to let it heal. She threaded her needle, and because she was her father's daughter and because her father, the curate, had spent his life mending things no one else would touch, she did not simply set the torn seam and ring the bell. She mended the coat, all of it. Quietly, patiently, through the whole long afternoon, picking out the clumsy heartbroken stitches one by one and replacing them with her own, so fine they scarcely showed, matching the woman's old work at the collar rather than covering it, leaving that alone, leaving that sacred, but making the rest whole. She sewed as the light failed and the fire sank. She sewed as if the coat were a person. She did not hear the door. The Duke of Glennister had come at dusk to see whether the woman had gone to reclaim his coat, which he did not like to have out of his sight, and which he had regretted surrendering the moment it left his hands. He stopped in the doorway, and he saw a slight brown-gowned woman bent over his coat in the last of the firelight, her needle moving, her face gentle and absorbed, and he saw that she was not merely repairing the seam he had torn. She was mending all of it. She had her hands inside the thing he could let no one touch, and she was making it whole, and she had left, he saw it, even from the door. She had left the old brown stitches at the collar exactly as they were. He should have been enraged. For 3 years, rage had been the nearest thing to feeling he could reliably summon. He waited for it. It did not come. Instead, something moved in his chest that he had thought as dead as the rest of him. A kind of terrible gratitude, so sharp it was nearly grief, that a stranger, a seamstress, a woman he had ordered kept out of his sight, had understood without being told which stitches were only cloth and which were his wife, and had had the tenderness to spare the one while she healed the other. "You were told," he said, and his voice came out rough to mend the seam. Clara did not startle. She set the last stitch and bit the thread and only then looked up. Her tired gray eyes met his without fear and without apology. "I was told to mend the coat, your grace," she said, "so I have mended the coat." She turned the collar toward him, gently showing him. "I did not touch these. They are another hand's and older and finer than mine, and it was not my place to take them out. But the rest of it was ready to fall to pieces, and I do not think," she chose the words with care, "I do not think the one who set those first stitches would have wished the whole to go to rags for the sake of a corner. I think she would have wished it kept whole, so I have tried to keep it whole." The fire ticked. The Duke of Glennister stood in the doorway of the small room and could not speak. "I have overstepped," Clara said quietly into his silence and rose, gathering her basket. "I ask your pardon. Send me no fee if you are displeased. The mending was my choice, not your order. I'll go by the back stairs, your grace, as you wished, and trouble you no further." She held the coat out to him across the space between them, folded, whole, warm from her hands in the fire. And Julian, Duke of Glennister, who had let no living person hand him that coat in 3 years, crossed the room and took it from her. The servants of Glennister Court did not know what to make of it. For 3 years they had crept about the great house as one creeps about a sick room, speaking in whispers, letting the fires burn low, drawing the shutters, because the Duke could not abide light or noise or the ordinary sounds of a house alive. They had watched their master waste to a shadow of the laughing man he had been, and they had grieved for him, and they had learned to expect nothing else ever until he died of it, which the older ones privately believed he would. And now, of a sudden, there was a seamstress in the small room off the library, and the fires were kept up, and the Duke sat where the fires were, and the whole slow machinery of the house began, creaking, to turn again. It was Mrs. Danver, the housekeeper, who first put a name to it, and she put it to the steward Adair over their evening cup in a tone of frightened wonder. "He came into the kitchen today," she said. "His Grace, into the kitchen to ask cook whether she could not manage a proper dinner, not a tray, a dinner at the table, 2 covers, to Mr. Adair. He has not sat at that table since the mistress died. He has not eaten a proper dinner in 3 years. She set down her cup. "It is the sewing woman. I do not know how she has done it, and I do not like to guess, but she has done it, and I say God bless her for it, whatever the county comes to say." For the county would come to say something. They both knew that. A duke did not sit at dinner with the woman who mended his coats, but that was a trouble for later, and the house, which had been dying, chose for now simply to be glad. Clara herself was not glad, or not only glad. She came each morning down the long avenue from the town, and each morning she told herself sternly that she was a seamstress engaged to do fine work, and that the warmth in the small room, and the Duke who came to sit in it, and the low grave conversations that had begun to unspool between them like thread off a reel, were nothing to build a hope upon, were, if anything, a danger, for a woman in her place who let herself hope for a man in his, was a woman preparing her own heartbreak with her own hands. She had buried her father. She had buried, before that, every expectation of an easy life. She knew what the world did to curates' daughters who forgot themselves. And yet, he was not what she had expected. She had come to the court expecting a monster. The county called him mad, half of it, and cruel, the other half, and had found instead a man so broken by love that he had stopped his own life rather than live it without the woman he had lost. There was nothing cruel in that. There was only grief worn so long it had calcified into a kind of armor, and Clara, who understood grief and who could not sit idle before any broken thing, had done to the man exactly what she did to a torn coat, sat down with him and taken pains, and begun, without quite deciding to make him whole. She had not meant to love him. Loving him was a foolishness she could not afford. But the heart, she was learning, kept its own accounts, and did not consult the ledger of what one could afford. "You are far away this morning, Miss Rowan," the Duke said one day from his chair across the small room. He had taken to watching her work in a way that ought to have discomfited her and instead only warmed her, which was itself a danger. "You have set the same 6 stitches 3 times." Clara looked down and found it was true. She had been picking them out and setting them again without seeing them at all. She flushed. "Wool gathering, your grace, forgive me. My mind was on my sisters, that is, I have no sisters," she caught herself. "On my father, it would have been his birthday this week. The mind wanders to such things." "Tell me about him," said the Duke. And so she did, haltingly at first, then more freely. As the morning wore on and the fire burned, and the needle went, told him about the small living, and the leaking rectory roof, and the parishioners who paid the curate in eggs and mended boots because they had nothing else, and the shelf of books he had bought instead of a warm coat, and the way he had taught his daughter Greek by candlelight, because he could not bear that a good mind should go untilled for want of a son to till it in. She had not spoken of her father to anyone in 2 years. There had been no one to speak to. She spoke of him now to a duke, and the Duke listened, truly listened, his dark head bent, his own great grief for once set quiet to make room for hers, and when she had finished, and found to her horror that her eyes were wet, he did not look away or offer awkward comfort. He only said quietly, "He sounds a man worth the grieving. You were fortunate in him, Miss Rowan, however short the while." "I was," Clara said, wiping her eyes with the back of a needle-pricked hand. "I am sorry, I do not usually." "Do not apologize," said the Duke of Glennister, "for grieving in this house. It is the one thing we do very well here." And there was, incredibly, the ghost of dry humor in it, the first she had heard from him, and she surprised herself by laughing, wetly, and he almost smiled. And the small room off the library was, for a moment, not a sick room at all, but only a warm place where 2 people who had each lost the person who loved them best sat together, and were, for that moment, a little less alone. He did not send her away by the back stairs. He found, to his own astonishment, that he did not want her to go at all. "There is other work," he heard himself say absurdly, holding the coat against him. "In the house, linen, hangings, all of it neglected. My mother's rooms are shut up and the curtains rotting on their rings. There is a year of mending in this house if there is a day's." This was not true. The house had a housekeeper and the linen was well enough. He was inventing reasons like a boy, and he knew it, and he could not stop. "You would be paid properly. You would come daily." "You need not. I would not require you to be sent up the back stairs." Clara looked at him a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sense that she saw straight through the invented mending to the thing beneath it, the way she had seen through the torn seam to the whole broken coat. "I will come, your grace," she said simply. "There is always mending in any house. I am glad of the work." And she curtsied and went by the front way this time, because he walked her to the door himself, to the scandal of Adair and the open-mouthed wonder of the 2 remaining footmen, who had not seen their master cross the great hall in the light of day for the better part of a year. She came the next day and the next, and the house, which had stopped, began by imperceptible degrees to move again. It was the mending that did it, at first the honest, ordinary rhythm of it. She sat in the small room off the library with her work-basket, and she mended things, and because she was there the fire was kept up, and because the fire was kept up the room grew warm, and because the room grew warm the Duke of Glennister, who had nowhere in his own house he liked to be, took to sitting in it. He told himself he came for his correspondence. He brought his ledgers and did not open them. He sat across the small room from the seamstress and watched her needle go, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence in his head was not the only sound. They did not speak much in the beginning. She did not chatter. He had forbidden chatter, and she took him at his word, and he found, perversely, that he wished she would not. It was he who broke it at last on a wet afternoon a fortnight in. "You lost your father," he said abruptly. "Adair told me, the curate." "I did, your grace." Her needle did not pause, 2 years since. "And your mother." Long before, I scarcely remember her, a stitch. It was only ever the two of us, my father and I. He had a small living and a great many parishioners and no gift at all for money, so there was never anything put by, and when he died there was the debt of his kindness to settle and nothing to settle it with, so I sew. She said it without self-pity as she said everything. I do not mind it. He used to say that mending was a holy sort of work, that God made the world and then broke it and left us the needles. I thought it a strange thing for a clergyman to say. I think of it often now. God broke the world, Julian repeated low, and left us the needles. He meant, I think, that we are none of us here to keep things from breaking, Clara said. We cannot. Everything breaks. He meant that we are here to mend, to sit down with the broken thing, whatever it is, and take pains over it and make it whole enough to go on, even if the seam still shows, especially if it shows. She looked up then, and her tired gray eyes rested on him, and on the black coat he wore, mended now so finely it scarcely showed at all except at the collar where she had left the old brown stitches, and where he touched them sometimes, without knowing he did it. The seam is not the shame of the thing, he said. The seam is the proof it was worth mending. The rain came against the glass. The Duke of Glennister looked at the seamstress across the small, warm room and felt something inside him. Some seam he had let go to rags 3 years ago on a wet March road take, at last, a first careful stitch. After that they talked. He told her things he had told no one. He told her about the fiddlers and the dancing and the man he had been, the agreeable man, and how he despised that man now for having been so easily happy, and how he despised himself more for missing him. He told her one gray evening about the wheel and the stone and the walking away without a scratch, in a flat dead voice, staring at the fire, and Clara set down her mending and listened, and did not weep, which he could not have borne, and did not tell him it was not his fault, which he would not have believed, but only said when he had finished, "You have carried it alone for 3 years. That is a very long time to carry a thing alone." And that was all. And it was, somehow, everything. She mended more than the coat. He knew it, though he did not say it. She mended the hours of his day, giving them shape. She mended his appetite, sitting with him at the small table she had, without a word, laid there one evening so that he ate because she ate. She mended, stitch by stitch, the great tearing silence of Glennister Court, until one afternoon a footman was heard to whistle in the passage and did not lose his place for it. The housekeeper reported to Adair, in tones of religious awe, that the Duke had asked for the shutters of the east drawing-room to be opened. The east drawing-room had been shut since the funeral. And Julian, watching Clara Rowan bend over her needle in the firelight day after day, understood slowly, the way a man understands the coming of spring, first disbelieving it, that he had fallen in love with the seamstress who had been sent for to mend his coat and be gone. The understanding frightened him more than grief ever had, for grief, at least, was faithful. Grief did not ask him to risk anything he had not already lost. But this asked everything. To love again was to stand once more where he had stood on the London road, with everything he cared for loaded into one fragile carriage at the mercy of one stone in the dark. He did not know if he had the courage. He had walked away without a scratch once, and it had nearly killed him. He did not think he could survive doing it twice. So he said nothing, and the world which breaks everything took the choice for a little while out of his hands. There was one afternoon that he came, afterward, to think of as the turning of the year in him, though the calendar said nothing of it. It was raining, as it so often was that autumn, and Clara had spread across the small room's table a great length of faded rose-colored damask, the hangings of his mother's rooms, which had rotted on their rings in the years the wing had stood shut, and which she had asked leave to try to save. The Duke had given the leave carelessly, as he gave all leave now, glad only of a reason to keep her in the house. He had not thought about what the hangings were, or where they came from, until he stood in the doorway and saw them spread out in the gray light, and the whole shut wing of his childhood came back to him in the smell of the old cloth. "Those were my mother's," he said. Clara looked up from the shears. "So the housekeeper told me. She said the wing had not been opened since. I did not like to ask since when, your grace." She set the shears down. "I can leave them, if it is painful. I only thought it a shame to let good damask go to the moth for want of a day's work." "No," he said. He came into the room slowly and touched the faded rose with one finger, and it was very strange, after so many years of feeling nothing but the one great grief, to feel a smaller, older one underneath it, like a stone found under a stone. "She died when I was 19, he said. "My mother. A long wasting illness. My father did not, he was not a tender man, and he did not sit with her, and so I sat with her at the end in that wing among these hangings. And when she was gone, I shut the rooms and could not go back into them. I had forgotten I had done it. One forgets, I find, how many rooms one has shut." Clara said nothing. She only came and stood beside him at the table and took up a fold of the rose damask in her own hands, gently, the way she took up everything, and after a moment she said, "Then we will save them and hang them again, and the wing shall be opened. Not for a stranger's bride to sleep in, for her. Because a thing kept whole in a house is a way of keeping the one who loved it. My father used to say the dead do not want our shut rooms, they want our lived-in ones." She smiled faintly, sadly. "He said a great many things, my father. I did not always listen. I listen now when it is too late to tell him." And Julian, Duke of Glennister, standing over his mother's damask in the rain, understood that this woman had lost as he had lost, and had come out of it not hard as he had, but soft, that grief had taught her tenderness where it had taught him only silence, and that she was, without in the least intending it, teaching him the tenderness now, stitch by stitch and word by word, the way one teaches a frightened animal to take food from an open hand. He worked beside her that whole afternoon, a duke at a servant's table, holding the damask taut while she cut and pinned, saying little, needing to say little. It was the most peaceful hour he had known in 3 years. When the light failed and the work was done and she began to gather the pins, he found he did not want the afternoon to end, and he said awkwardly, like a boy, "Will you take tea, here, with me? It is nearly the hour, and it seems foolish for you to carry a tray to me across the passage when you are already in the room." She looked at him a long moment, and he thought she would refuse on the grounds of what was proper. She was scrupulous about what was proper, more scrupulous than he was, guarding her own dignity because no one else in that great house had standing to guard it for her. But she only said, "I will take tea, your grace. Thank you." And she did, and they sat on either side of the small hearth as the rain came down, and he told her, haltingly, about his mother, the real woman, not the invalid, the one who had sung at the pianoforte and had a temper, and had once thrown a slipper at his father across a dinner table, which had scandalized the whole county and delighted the 9-year-old Julian beyond measure. And Clara laughed, really laughed, a low, warm sound he had not heard from her before, and the sound of it in that small room did something to the Duke of Glennister that 3 years of grief and one length of rose damask had been building toward. It made him want, fiercely and simply, to hear it again every day for the rest of his life. He did not say so. He was not ready, and he was afraid, and there was the great gulf of rank between them that he did not yet know how to cross. But he knew, sitting there in the firelight with the rain on the glass and her laugh still warm in the air, that the man who had walked away from the wreck without a scratch had, at long last, begun to be scratched, to bleed a little, to feel, and that it was this small brown-gowned seamstress who had, without asking his leave, reopened the wound and was patiently, tenderly, sewing it into something that could heal. "You have a good laugh," he said before he could stop himself. "I have not heard it before." Clara colored and looked down at her cup. "There has not been much in this house to laugh at, your grace," she said, "until lately." "No," said the Duke of Glennister, and found he was smiling, actually smiling, the first in 3 years, and it felt as strange on his face as the grief under the grief had felt in his chest. "Until lately. I am glad you find something here to laugh at now." "I find a great deal," said Clara softly, and did not look up, and neither of them said the rest of it, and neither of them needed to, and the rain came down on the reopened wing of Glennister Court, where his mother's rose damask lay ready to be hung again in rooms that would, at last, be lived in. It was a dare, well-meaning and fatal, who nearly ended it. The steward had watched his master come back to life over the course of 2 months, and being a decent man who loved the Duke, he rejoiced in it, and being a careful man who loved the dukedom, he grew uneasy about its cause. A duke did not marry a curate's daughter who took in sewing. A duke could not. There was the name to think of, the great connections, the county, the whole vast weight of what a Glennister owed his line. And so Adair, believing he did his duty, took it upon himself one morning to speak to Miss Rowan privately, gently, man to woman, about what the town was beginning to say, and about how it would be a kindness to his grace, a true kindness, the truest, if she were to conclude her work at the court and take herself quietly out of the way before the talk did him harm. Clara heard him out. She had known, of course. She had always known. She had let herself forget it a little in the small, warm room with her needle, and that was her own foolishness, and she did not blame the steward for reminding her. "You are quite right, Mr. Adair," she said, and her voice did not tremble because it had learned long ago not to. "The mending is finished. I should have gone a week ago." She gathered her basket, and she went down the front steps this time into the cold without seeing the Duke, because she could not have borne to see the Duke, and she walked back down to the town below with her back straight and her face still, and did not let herself weep until she had shut her own door. When Julian came to the small room that afternoon and found it empty, the fire cold, the work-basket gone, the chair pushed neatly in, he thought at first that she was only late. Then he saw the coat. She had left it folded on the chair where the basket had stood, his coat, the black one whole now, mended so fine it scarcely showed, and laid across it a folded square of paper, and in it, in a small, careful curate's daughter hand, "The mending is finished, your grace. I am glad to have known this house whole again. Wear it well. Cr." He stood holding the note for a long time. And then the fear that had kept him silent for 2 months, the fear of standing again on the London road with everything he loved loaded into one fragile carriage, turned all at once, in the empty cold room, into a far greater and simpler fear. That he had let her go, that the world had broken this too, and that he had sat by with the needle in his hand and done nothing. God broke the world, he thought, and left us the needles. He did not ring for the carriage. There was no time, and besides, he had walked away from a carriage once, and it had saved his life and cost him everything, and he was done with carriages. He went on foot, down the long avenue and out the gates and along the wet lane to the town below, the whole 2 miles of it in the mended black coat, a Duke walking bareheaded in the road like any common man. And the tenants who saw him pass stood at their doors and stared, for it was the agreeable Duke of old, the one who filled a room, come back among them, hurrying, his face alive. He came to the curate's cottage at the edge of the town, small and clean and poor, and he knocked, and Clara Rowan opened the door with her eyes still red and her chin still up, and she stared at the Duke of Glennister standing in the lane in the coat she had mended. "You forgot to charge me," he said. She blinked, "Your Grace." For the coat. His voice was not steady. He had rehearsed nothing, there had been no time, there was only the truth which he had been afraid of for 3 years and was suddenly not afraid of at all. "You mended my coat and you did not charge me, and I find I cannot allow the debt to stand because it is far too large. You did not mend a coat, Clara Rowan, you mended the man in it. You came up the back stairs to set one torn seam, and instead you sat down with the whole broken thing, and you took pains over it over me for 2 months, and you made me whole enough to go on. And then you left because a steward told you the county would talk, and you went quietly to spare me, as if I were a coat you could set down finished on a chair." He took a breath. "I will not be set down, do you hear me? I have been 3 years a thing that had stopped, and you started me, and I will not be left folded on a chair with a note pinned to me, however kindly meant." Clara's hand had gone to her mouth. "Your Grace, you cannot the name what will be said." "They will say the Duke of Glennister married the woman who saved his life," he said. "Which will be true, let them say it. I have spent 3 years caring only what a dead world thought of me. I would like now to care what you think of me, so I am asking." And there in the lane, in the mended coat, before her open door and every staring neighbor in the town, the Duke of Glennister took the seamstress's hand, the small, needle-pricked, work-hardened hand that had sat with his broken thing and taken pains, and he held it as though it were the most precious cloth in the world. "Your father was wrong about one thing," he said, more softly. "The seam is not only the proof a thing was worth mending, it is the proof 2 hands were willing to mend it. Be my second hand, Clara, everything breaks. Let us mend it together, you and I, for as long as we are lent the needles, marry me." The tears came then, both of hers, and, to his own surprise, one of his the first in 3 years, and it did not feel like breaking. It felt like a seam taking. The seam will show, Clara whispered, half laughing, half weeping. A duke and a seamstress, it will show all our lives. Then let it show, said Julian, Duke of Glennister, and drew her into his arms in the wet lane. Especially if it shows. You told me so yourself. They were married in her father's own small church, where he had preached his holy work of mending, with the whole town below crowded in the pews and the county aristocracy crowded in behind them, come to sneer and remaining to weep. For there was not a heart in the building that had not known what the Duke had lost and could not help but be glad of what he had found. Adair gave the bride away, having begged her pardon on his knees, and wept harder than anyone. The east drawing-room was thrown open, and the shutters taken clean off their hinges, and Glennister Court was full of light and music, and the smell of a French supper for the first time in 3 years, and the fiddlers were paid double. She did not put away her work-basket. She kept it by the fire in the small room off the library all her life, and mended still when the mood took her, the tenants' hurts, the servants' torn things, the great house's endless small wounds, because she was her father's daughter and could not sit idle with a broken thing in reach. And the Duke of Glennister kept, folded in a cedar chest, the one black coat, whole now, the old brown stitches at the collar preserved forever beside her fine new ones, the 2 women's work lying quiet together where he could visit it when he needed to, and put it away again, and come back to the light and the living warmth of the woman who had taught him that everything breaks, and that we are here to mend. God broke the world, she said to him once, years on, watching their children run shrieking across the sunlit lawn where no one had laughed in a decade, and left us the needles. And a very great deal of thread, said the Duke, and kissed the top of her head and did not let her go.